When a leader says he's saving the people from hunger while the people are literally starving, the problem is no longer ideology, it's character. Because at that point there are only two possibilities. Either that person has completely lost touch with reality, or they never had any intention of saving anyone. And the worst part? It doesn't matter which one is true. The result is the same. A country destroyed, people fleeing, children eating from the trash. This is not the story of a brilliant dictator. It's the story of something far more common, and for that very reason far more dangerous. A mediocre man in the wrong place with far too much power in his hands. Remember that. Because what destroyed Venezuela didn't start with a villain. It started with a successor. Nicolás Maduro Moros was born in 1962 in Caracas into a working-class family. In his youth, he was a bus driver, a union activist, a left-wing militant, the kind of background that comes with a ready-made narrative, the man of the people who understands struggle because he lived it. And for a long time, that was the story he told, the story many believed. He entered politics in the 1990s at the height of the Bolivarian movement led by Hugo Chavez, a charismatic lieutenant colonel who promised to end inequality, expel imperialism, and return power to the Venezuelan people. Maduro became a close ally, loyal, discreet. He wasn't the brightest, he wasn't the most charismatic, but he was loyal, and in the game of power, loyalty is gold. In 2013, when Chavez died of cancer, Maduro was anointed as his successor, not because of competence, not because of broad popular consensus, but because Chavez, on his deathbed, pointed to him and said, "It's him." And that was that. Venezuela inherited a leader who had never been forced to prove he could actually lead. And here's the problem. Inheriting an ideological throne is easy. Inheriting a structural economic crisis, runaway inflation, brutal dependence on oil, and a growing opposition, that's another story entirely. But Maduro had one advantage. He also inherited the manual, the Chavista script. And that script had a golden rule. Never admit error. Always blame the external enemy. Always say it's for the people. And if the people complain, well, maybe the people are being manipulated. By the end of this video, you'll realize this didn't stay in the past. You'll see that this logic is still alive. And not only in Venezuela. When Maduro took office, Venezuela was already in trouble. The economy depended almost entirely on oil. Chavez had nationalized industries, expelled investors, and printed money as if tomorrow didn't exist. But as long as oil prices were high, it was possible to hide the cracks, to distribute benefits, to sustain social programs, to keep the revolutionary narrative alive. Then, in 2014, oil prices collapsed, and with them, Venezuela collapsed too. Maduro could have reformed. He could have negotiated with the opposition. He could have admitted the model needed adjustment. He did none of that. He did what every mediocre leader does when reality knocks on the door. He denied reality. He blamed the United States. He blamed the opposition. He blamed a supposed economic war orchestrated by business elites. He built a narrative of siege, conspiracy, and betrayal. And when the narrative wasn't enough, he began to control who was allowed to speak. He shut down newspapers, arrested opponents, stripped elected officials of their mandates. He created a parallel constituent assembly, fully controlled by the government, to neutralize the National Assembly, which had an opposition majority, and he called it defending democracy. This is what almost no one notices. He never said, "I am a dictator." He said, "I am the guardian of the revolution." And he used the language of social justice to justify the suppression of freedom. Meanwhile, the economy collapsed completely. Inflation exploded. In 2018, it reached 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. That's not exaggeration. That's official data. The Venezuelan currency became worthless, literally. People used banknotes for crafts because they were worth more than spending. Empty supermarkets, hospitals without medicine, people digging through trash, people crossing borders just to eat. More than 7 million Venezuelans fled the country, one of the largest migration crises in recent Latin American history. And Maduro appeared on television with a forced smile, holding a tray of meat, saying everything was fine, that the revolution was alive, that the people were strong, while the people were dying of malnutrition. And here's the part that hurts. He probably believed it. Not completely maybe, but enough. Because when you surround yourself with yes men, with generals who depend on you, with allies who are afraid to tell the truth, you start living inside a bubble. And inside that bubble, you're not the problem, you're the misunderstood solution. But there's something that needs to be said. Maduro didn't do this alone. He had support. Support from the armed forces, who profited from the chaos. Support from Cuba, which saw Venezuela as a source of cheap oil. Support from Russia and China, who saw a geopolitical opportunity. And of course, support from a segment of the population that either depended on government aid or genuinely believed the enemy was external. Because that's what regimes like this do. They create dependence. They turn assistance into loyalty. And when someone is hungry, when they rely on a food box distributed by the state, they won't bite the hand that feeds them, even if that hand feeds poorly, late, and in crumbs. And that's where everything begins to go irreversibly wrong. In 2018, Maduro won an election, at least on paper. The opposition boycotted it. International observers called it a farce, but he was declared the winner. The following year, Juan Guaidó, president of the National Assembly, declared himself interim president, arguing that Maduro's election was illegitimate. The world split. The United States, Brazil, Colombia, and dozens of other countries recognized Guaidó. Russia, China, Cuba, Turkey, Iran stood by Maduro. Venezuela became a geopolitical chessboard. And the people kept starving. Guaidó tried protests, international pressure, even a failed attempt at a military uprising. Nothing worked. Because in the end, Maduro had what mattered, the weapons, and whoever controls the weapons controls the country. Simple as that. Meanwhile, Maduro was changing, not into a brilliant strategist, not into a visionary leader, but into a paranoid survivor, surrounded by generals, isolated from the world, increasingly dependent on authoritarian powers to stay in control. He stopped being the heir to the revolution. He became a man desperate not to fall. If you like understanding how power transforms people, how beautiful speeches turn into real-world tragedies, and how history repeats itself under different disguises, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't idolize, we question, and we use the past and the present, so we don't fall into the same traps. Now we arrive at 2025. After years of tension, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and internal pressure, what once seemed impossible finally happens. Images spread, news broadcasts interrupt programming, the word invasion returns to the international vocabulary, the United States enters Venezuela, and Nicolás Maduro is arrested, taken to New York. No longer as president, but as a defendant. He faces charges of drug trafficking, corruption, and crimes against humanity. The world debates. Was it legitimate? Was it imperialism? Was it justice? Was it economic interest disguised as humanitarian mission? It doesn't matter which answer you choose. What matters is that, at that moment, Maduro stopped being a leader. He became a symbol of a project that collapsed, a symbol of an ideology that promised everything and delivered misery, a symbol of a man who had the right script and no idea how to actually govern. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Maduro is not a mastermind of evil. He's not Stalin. He's mediocre and stubborn. And that combination, when placed in charge of an entire country, can be just as destructive as any classic tyrant. Because a brilliant tyrant knows he's being cruel, a mediocre one believes he's doing the right thing, and while he believes, millions suffer. And here's something we need to face. This is not exclusive to Venezuela, not exclusive to the left, not exclusive to any specific place. This pattern repeats itself. The weak successor, the savior narrative, blind loyalty replacing competence, the external enemy used to hide internal failure. You've seen this before, in other countries, in other eras, maybe even on a smaller scale in environments you know. The boss who's never wrong, the community leader who never accepts criticism, the public figure who turns every disagreement into betrayal. It's the same mechanism, only the scenery changes. Did Maduro destroy Venezuela? Yes, but not in a vacuum. He destroyed it because he inherited a fragile system and made it even more fragile, because he refused to adapt, because he chose narrative over facts, because he surrounded himself with loyalists instead of competent people, and because deep down he was never prepared for the job. He was prepared to be loyal, and loyalty doesn't govern a country. Loyalty doesn't fill stomachs. Loyalty doesn't fix an economy. When you look at Maduro's trajectory, it's hard not to ask, how often do we choose leaders for their narrative instead of their ability? How often do we tolerate incompetence because someone speaks well? How often do we defend someone not because they're right, but because admitting they're wrong would mean admitting we were fooled? Maduro is an extreme example, but the principle is universal, and perhaps the most disturbing part of all is this: he still has supporters. People who believe he was a victim, who believe the real problem was foreign interference, who believe that if he'd just been allowed to govern in peace, everything would have worked out. And that tells us something, not about Maduro, about us, about how easy it is to choose a side and ignore facts, about how comfortable it is to blame an enemy and never look inward. Maduro's arrest closes a chapter, but it solves nothing. Venezuela remains devastated, millions are still displaced, reconstruction will take decades, and the chance of another Maduro, with a different name, a different flag, a different narrative, remains very real. Because Maduro's mistake didn't die with him. His mistake was believing ideological righteousness could replace practical competence, believing good intentions justify disastrous outcomes, believing the people is an abstract concept instead of millions of real individuals with real hunger and real pain. And until we understand that, we'll keep repeating the same story. History doesn't punish those who make mistakes. It punishes those who refuse to learn.